Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. Taha Ghayur here on Canada Today Show with another episode where we feature a prominent Muslim changemaker. We have interesting women, interesting men, and youth who push boundaries in the right direction using their creativity, activism, and skills. Today, I'm excited to actually bring to you a wonderful personality who has done some amazing work in the field of media. We will talk about her amazing creative endeavors over the past almost 2 decades now. And we're talking specifically about Zarqa Nawaz, one and only Zarqa Nawaz. Zarqa is a best-selling author, journalist, speaker, and award-winning filmmaker who created the CBC hit series Little Mosque on the Prairie, or just The Little Mosque. The show was the first mainstream sitcom about a Muslim community living in the West. After it won a Gemini Award in 2007, Zarqa went on to write and sell comedy pilots for broadcast TV networks like ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox Studios. Zarqa also lent her broadcasting abilities to CBC Radio in 2018. She hosted Saskatchewan's morning show for CBC Radio called The Morning Edition. And last year, Zarqa also anchored CBC Saskatchewan's 6 o'clock news. In addition to her work in media and television, Zarqa has made great strides in publishing world. Her bestseller memoir called Laughing All the Way to the Mosque highlights her Canadian Pakistani roots while giving readers a funny take on on issues like immigration, tradition, and culture. While Zarqa is mostly known for the iconic and wildly successful hit show Little Mosque on the Prairie, we'll learn a little bit more about her comedic aspirations, her community work, and the prominent position in the Muslim community as a contemporary voice that she represents. So welcome to our show, Zarqa. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for inviting me. This is very exciting.
You're welcome. Well, let me start off by asking you. You have done amazing, shows that are funny, that highlight and spotlight Muslim community in a lighter and funnier light, which we don't get to see, of course, on the big screen. I wanted to ask you and start off by asking you: are you a funny person yourself in real life? If people get to know you or even meet you for the first time, do people see Zarqa as a funny person?
It's funny. My husband was just mentioning this to me because he said, people to just follow you around and see how crazy you're driving everyone around you, how unself-aware you are about how crazy you make everybody else around you, because I don't think you're really aware of your impact on the family. So he would have a lot to say on that. I think that I am oblivious to what's happening around me and just sort of like charge like a bull through a china shop and drive everyone nuts around me. So I think that they would have a lot to say about how oblivious I am to the chaos I'm causing to people who live with me. Yes.
Well, great. It's good to hear that. And crazy people do crazy things, and you certainly have done some crazy things that have had some very positive impact. And yes, it happens to be a lot of funny things that you have produced. So let's talk about, it's hard not to talk about the Little Mosque on the Prairie, which of course has, made you who you are today, or starting off at least with that. And I'm sure you get asked these kinds of questions all the time. Little Mosque on the Prairie became an international phenomena. You have reviews and publications in New York Times, Washington Times, Houston Chronicle, CBC, BBC, CNN, of course. So why do you think Little Mosque resonated so well with so many Canadians around the world, Canadians as well as people around the world? I mean, we're talking about 83 countries around the world who were one way or the other impacted by it or actually were touched by it.
I think because it was the first one that had ever come out, and up to that point, Muslims were only seen as caricatures, objects of villainy, Muslim men in caves, terrorists, Muslim women, married to women in caves, oppressed by those terrorists. And so no one literally, like, people believe that's who we were. That's the whole
Yes.
persona of our community. So suddenly to have this show where Muslims were doing like benign things like paying their mortgage, going to work, attending PTA meetings, bowling, playing curling, like those boring things any other community would be doing. But no one had ever seen Muslims do this before. And that
Mm.
was so shocking. I mean, the banality of our lives was shocking because it had never been expressed on television before. So I think the newness was incredible. I mean, you have to remember this was 2007, and there was nothing on television that represented our community, nothing. And so when this happened, people were just like, "Wow, are they like us? Are they normal?" And like we forget how powerful the media is when you just see the community on the news, this one tiny segment or sliver of our community, people believe that's the whole community.
Mm.
So I think that was the reason it resonated so much in the world.
And I think the diversity of experiences, of daily life experiences of normal human beings who happen to be Muslims and Canadians and whatever other hats they were wearing and whatever other identities they actually had, I think made it really a very powerful and relatable show. So thank you for that incredible initiative. Um, and at the time when you produced this, you described it as a laugh out loud approach to making sense of culture and clash, and reality in the post 9/11 world. Now, of course, as we were just talking about this earlier, the world has changed so much, and youth, of course, who the millennials and some and younger kids, in fact, who may not have actually even seen perhaps this show, or this series, they may not be able to even understand what you mean by this. So would you be able to take a moment to describe what was the show's premise at the time when you wrote it, and what really inspired you to actually write this?
I had just finished a documentary in 2005 entitled Me and the Mosque for the National Film
Okay.
Board of Canada. And, the whole issue about Muslim women and their place in the mosque was something that was really bothering me because mosques were becoming more and more conservative. And, when I was growing up, women and men prayed in the same prayer hall. But gradually, as communities grew, this idea that we shouldn't have a shared space, or the space should be divided, where women had unequal space and unequal access to the khatib, like, there should be a curtain, or we should be up in balconies looking down. Those balconies were cut off even from looking down, loss of air and space and ability to hear. And we were being like, it was like chattel. And I was like, where did the difference come in? And I was realizing sort of these patriarchal cultural traditions were getting mixed up with theology, and people believed that it was somehow Islamic to have women hidden in a mosque, and somehow our sexuality or our presence was, causing fitna. And these were like very cultural patriarchal traditions that were becoming mixed up
Mm.
with theology. And I thought, wow, we really need to take a look at what's happening, because this is damaging our communities. Because what's going to happen is, after the first generation, that's it. Like, our moms will go, but our daughters won't go, and they stop, they had stopped going to the mosque, because why would you go to a mosque where you're treated like a second class citizen, when you could, in society, women are being elevated and encouraged to, break the glass ceiling, and then, our own community is doing everything it can to subdue women. And I knew it wasn't coming from Islam, because, during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there were no curtains or separations between men and women. Women actually spoke up, in the mosque. The famous story about Omar, when he was trying to reduce the mahar for women, and a woman standing up going, why are you doing this? I'm paraphrasing, of course. And
Mhm.
he saw her, he heard her, he acknowledged her. You couldn't do that in most mosques today. And why is that?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that really, really bothered me. So I made a documentary, and I interviewed mostly male scholars, because it is a problem of patriarchy. So I thought, let's talk to men, because men listen to men. And all the big scholars around the world were like, yeah, this is wrong. We are going backwards in time in how we treat women in our community, and the access we're giving them to our power structures. And we need to start talking about this. And it was hard. It was hard to do, because, people are like, you're washing our dirty laundry. people already have a bad impression of us. And my attitude was like if we are honest about our shortcomings and we tell people this isn't from our faith, this is from culture and we are working on it, then people take that issue more seriously and take us more seriously as a community, as opposed to pretending it doesn't exist and trying to forever get this image of us as these perfect, people who treat women perfectly and we're all just misunderstood. Because, they see it, they can see it. And all communities have this problem, not just Muslims, but we all have to be honest about that. And so I made that documentary, Me in the Mosque. And from there, the idea, I thought, what if the imam really cared about women and young people in a mosque? What if he was an ally and was working hard to rectify some of this, the double standards, and what on top of it, if he was born and raised in North America, so that some of the men wouldn't view him as an authentic Muslim, right? He didn't have a beard, he had logic, and so I thought that would be a really interesting way to the juxtaposition between women, young people born and raised here, say some of the community that wasn't, and how would three groups get along in one mosque? Plus, it's in a church, so there would be that interfaith relationship. And then in a small town of Mercy, to figure out how everyone, and this was when rising Islamophobia was a thing, and how everyone would interact. So that's where the idea came from, and then the expression of the show. Because I had moved from Toronto to Saskatchewan, had been a Toronto transplant, so I thought it would be, so I mean, there's a difference when you come from a big kind of city that believes they're top of the world, like we're Americans, we're arrogant, we think we know everything. Come to another place in Canada, and then you realize, wow, they don't like us because we're so arrogant and think so highly of ourselves. And the attitude that I had with the imam coming to Mercy and running the mosque.
Wow, that's awesome. Funny thing is, the first time I heard your name or heard about your work actually was through this initial documentary, and it was not a very positive review from some very angry uncle who called me from Canada. And I said, like, okay, let me see what it is about, and what is she talking about in this? And really, my reaction was based on what I had seen. Was like, what is un-Islamic about what she's talking about? In fact, and reality is this is a common reality in many mosques, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about. And I thought that was actually a very bold and courageous thing, and the right thing to do for us to actually talk about this in a way that is still respectful and that is objective. And you're highlighting something that is an issue that is critical in our community. And I thought what is also interesting about the little mosque in Prairie was the fact that while you showed how normal, common Muslims in Canada are and were, but you also made a link to the religious community, and you made a link to you grounded it in the mosque. You grounded it in a place that is supposed to actually connect and bring the community together. And of course, there is going to be diversity in spirituality and people's journey to faith, but the way you presented it, I think, was very profound. And so I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about reactions from the Muslim community first, and then the wider community to this project of demystifying Islam and Islamic faith that you launched through this the little mosque in the Prairie. What kinds of reactions did you get from the Muslim community, and of course the wider community, which was really your target audience?
It was so interesting because everyone kept saying we need a show that represents Muslims. We need representation. This was before, the big buzzword representation matters. And so that was one of my goals, was to make a show that represented our community. And when it came out, it was so interesting because the reaction at first was very negative and very angry. Which was sort of interesting to me because I didn't see that coming and I couldn't figure it out. And, in retrospect, I realized part of the problem was that, for the vast majority of Muslims at that time period, they were the immigrant community, and comedy doesn't translate necessarily from the immigrant community to the first generation community that I belong to. And the difference in culture was so severe that a lot of people thought I was making fun of Islam and Muslims. And I feel like I was making fun of Muslims, which is fair game. But they felt by making fun of Muslims, I was making fun of Islam, and this was somehow going to be a show that was going to demonize the religion. And they were very, very upset. They were very angry, and they started, writing and calling the CBC and asking them to get the show removed. My husband was the president of the mosque. He had to recuse himself during, very angry board meetings. People in the mosque were upset, and they were trying to like intimidate him so that he would convince me to get the show off the air. They're like, you should threaten to divorce her. And I'm like, and he's like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. And I was really shocked. I was just like, wow, like what is happening? And it took a long time to sort it out, because I was just like, oh, the Muslim community is going to be so happy. And then they're like, how can we kill her? And I was like, no, like, I'm just joking. How can we get her to take the show off the air? And I couldn't figure it out. And then I was realizing, oh my God, they think that I'm insulting the faith. And so it was a cultural difference, right? Because when you make fun of Muslims, there's a difference between that and insulting the faith. And some people can't distinguish between the two. And it was the first comedy that had just come out. And friends of mine who were comedians, stand-up comedians back in that time, were also having a really hard time. Like their shows were getting canceled. They're being told stand-up comedy is un-Islamic, because we were the first wave of comedy, of the generation that was creating this fusion, between our identity, our representation, our experiences of growing up in North America. And no one had seen it yet. And, and scholars take a while. They're like a generation behind to catch up. And they, people are like, tell her it's haram. And they don't know what's happening. And it takes them a long time and so no one can really guide you or lead you. And you just have to be, if you're going to be the first out of the gate, it's going to be painful and it's going to be really hard. And then I looked at how other religious communities had handled it. And I realized the same thing had happened when the first shows, about like The Last Temptation of Christ. That was a movie made by, I believe, Martin Scorsese. When that first came out about, the life of Jesus, peace be upon him, in France, people firebombed theaters, and they threatened to burn entire, buildings down, and tried to, got the Pope involved. And if you remember SNL, the Saturday Night Live, when Sinead O'Connor ripped a picture of the Pope, I mean, there was nobody was protecting her freedom of speech. They were very, very angry. Her career never recovered from that experience. So I realized there were parallels in other religious communities, that if you're going to be the first one to do something, people haven't absorbed it completely, and we're having a really difficult time. And we're really truly convinced that it was going to make non-Muslims hate them even more than before. They were like totally convinced of this. And then what would happen is that non-Muslims would meet their Muslim friends at the water cooler and say, oh my God, this is an amazing show, and now I can finally understand my Muslim friends so much better, and you guys are just like us. We have the same arguments in church or synagogue or the PTA. And then so the Muslims kind of calm down and realize, oh, nothing catastrophic was actually happening, and that in fact the show was about universal experiences. Like the Muslims on the show were essentially the same, the matriarch, the rebellious teenager, the feminist. Like these were same characters that existed in every community. Just that what was original about it was that they were Muslims and it was set in a mosque, but it wasn't that original. There weren't, I wasn't creating people that didn't exist on earth. And so slowly they realized that their non-Muslim neighbors were bonding with them through the show, and that nothing really terrible had happened. And then they sort of calmed down after first year. Second year, they sort of started to accept it. By third year, they were like, oh yes, this is such a great show. And by the time the show went off the air, they're like, how come you're sitting around doing nothing? Like, why aren't you making another show? Like, wow, you guys, like you nearly tore me apart, making the show. And, and it sort of opened the door for other Muslims. Now we see stand-up, Muslim stand-up comedians as like it's normal. You see like in England, you have Citizen Khan. In the, US, you have Rami. And it's so interesting. When I was in the UK, you have a show called Citizen Khan, which is also set in a mosque. Yep. And the comments, right? And they were all like, wow, this is so disrespectful to Muslims. Not like Little Mosque on the Prairie. Now that show, and I was like, oh, please, right? Oh,
that's a standard now.
You were trying to get me, right? So it was a really difficult learning curve, and I had to like really hang in there. Alhamdulillah, my husband was super supportive. Thank God that social media hadn't been invented, because there was Facebook or Twitter or nothing. It was just like angry blogs, right? And phone calls.
Miss you.
So that didn't happen. Otherwise, I think I just would have been overwhelmed with just all the criticism that was coming down. And my husband was like, he gave me the best advice. He's like, listen, you got to put on blinkers, make the show that you want to make. You can't satisfy one group or another group, or you're just going to make a show that's kind of like too watered down. And it just won't make sense to anyone. So don't worry about it. Just, stick to your vision and do what you know is right and make a really funny, relatable show. And so that's what I did. But that first year was really, really hard.
Well, thank you for your courage and really sticking to what you were gonna do, and you did it. Now, 20 years, 15 years, have passed, ever since you produced that, 15 years or so, that wonderful show. The new generation, we have a new decade now and a new generation. We have COVID-19, this new TikTok generation who does not even necessarily sit around watching necessarily long, sitcoms. Do you think there is space for a series like this once again, on the big screen? And if yes, if you had the opportunity to write it today, would you do anything differently? Would you talk about some themes that would be different?
Yeah, I mean, of course it would be different because the community is different and the issues are different. I mean, that was a show of its time. And if you watch a show like Rami, that's on Hulu in the US, like that's also a show of its time about young people coming of age, praying, but having, issues with other, how they will practice Islam, what parts of Islam are easier for them to take on. And, that show also is being criticized, like, oh my God, they're showing Muslims behaving badly. I'm like, guess what? Muslims aren't these perfect angels that are just like perfect people. Like they are, having their issues like everybody else. And I feel that, that's an example of a show where you can see, what kind of challenges that Muslim youth are going through. And I mean, we are not a monolith as a community. Like Little Mosque was a sliver of who we are. But I mean, there's a whole, world of experiences that other Muslims can show about their lives and their experiences. I mean, that was part of, that was a part of my experience because I grew up in a, in a very mosque going community, in a mosque going family. And so that was part of my life. But today, my kids are grown up. The mosque isn't as important to me as it used to be. Because when your kids grow up, it changes its priority in your life. So I would make a different type of show exploring different themes now. And I think that as Muslims, we should be exploring different aspects of our life because we're almost 1 billion people. Like we all have different experiences and we need to explore all those different experiences. I'm tired of seeing the same dichotomy on shows where it's like immigrant versus first generation child and those clashes. Like that is not the sum all experience of our experiences. And that's common. It's almost a trope now in television and film. And I would like to break out of that, and show other experiences that we have, and other types of stories.
Well, speaking of stories, I mean, I know you come from a journalism background, mashallah. You studied journalism at Ryerson, but what led you to a point where you thought, what, I can write something for the big screen, and this is my time, this is my opportunity. Let's make it happen. I mean, what was that spark that led you to believe in yourself and actually do something so daring?
It's so interesting. Like like a lot of children of immigrant parents, was led to the medical career, like become a doctor. That is the best career for immigrant children. And and I can understand that, right? As a parent, you want your children to have a better life than their own, than the parents did. And so, if you can make it to medical school, you'll get a good 6-figure salary, you'll be set, everything will be fine. So we're all sort of channeled into this very narrow lane. And then when we're in university studying these courses, like for those of us who weren't meant for medical school, it becomes readily apparent that we have other aspirations. And I could tell when I was doing my physics and my, organic chemistry classes that it just wasn't sitting right with me. And I could feel that creative energy inside of me. And I couldn't put my finger on it. Like I could sense that this wasn't the place I belonged. And there was something else inside of me that really needed to be expressed. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I was meant to be a writer and a creator of, story. But that part of my experience and that part of me had been so like never really allowed to expand. And it was coming out in other ways. Like when I would go to Muslim camp, I would be writing the plays, I would be writing the articles. And my friends were people who were going into journalism or filmmaking or, novelists. And I thought, oh, those are the sexy forbidden careers, that's the careers that good Muslim women do. But I couldn't deny the fact that there was something inside of me that was saying, you need to do this, like, or you're going to die trying. And then I started like paying, I couldn't show that same enthusiasm that I did in high school to my science courses. They were just becoming like, it was just at that level, it was just becoming too much, and I was starting to gravitate towards the arts. And so I didn't get in after 4 years. And this was before the days where your parents could ship you off to the Caribbean or Poland or Australia or wherever you're going now to become a medical. Like, if you didn't get in, you didn't get in. That was the end of the line. No one could like ship you off
It's true.
some island or some country, and where you could be, forced through the system. I feel so sad for a lot of kids who are now like, if it's against their will. But those days, like, luckily for me, that wasn't even an option. That was the end of the story. My mom was like, "Oh, we'll get her married," and I'm like, "Wait, that can't be the only option: medical school or marriage." So then I applied to journalism school. It was the only deadline that hadn't passed, and obviously I didn't have a resume or clippings or anything, but I went in for an interview. They're like, "You're the only person who applied with a science degree. Nobody has a science degree." And I was like, "Oh, you know what? The reason I have a science degree is because I knew from the very beginning to get to the top journalism program in Canada, I'd have to compete against all thousands of people, and they would all have like
Humanities or
humanities. Who comes to you with a science degree?" So I knew I did this on purpose to stand out and to be number one, and that you guys need people qualified in science to write science articles. Of course, I didn't understand a word of my science courses, but I could tell that he was like, "Oh my God, you're right. We should definitely let you in." And I got in based on like nothing. And then that's where I knew, oh my God, I have the ability to tell story, and I can sell things that are out of whole cloth. And so I got in and I did journalism school, and I loved it and I thrived in it. But even then, even when I did journalism school, I knew that there was something about the journalism school that didn't satisfy my creative energy that existed inside of me. And someone said, "Really, you should be making films. You should be writing stories, because being a journalist, you're writing somebody else's story." And that's when I was like, oh my God, I didn't know enough about the arts to realize I should have gone into filmmaking. So I decided, I asked someone, "Well, what do you do if you haven't done filmmaking?" And they're like, "Well, there's a 3-week summer art film workshop at the Ontario College of Art." So I took it. And within 3 weeks, you make a short 5-minute film, and then you'll find out if you can make films. And so I did. And our instructor was like, "Well, you need to think of a subject matter for your 5-minute film." And I didn't know what to do. And that's when the Oklahoma bombing happened, I think in 1995, and Muslims were being arrested. It was the biggest domestic terrorism issue in the US at that time. And so I remember the Toronto Star had all these Muslim suspects. And then like literally 3 days later, a white guy named Timothy McVeigh was arrested. And he was someone who was very angry at the government for the mishandling of the David Koresh case, and he wanted to bring down the American government. And this is where I realized this is whole, white supremacist militia movement in the US that clearly the FBI has not been focusing on, and are very dangerous. And they're so focused on us that they don't see the other dangers, in the country. So I made a film called Barbecue Muslims, where two brothers are sleeping at night, and the barbecue blows up, and it turns out it's a barbecue anti-resistant front, and they're blowing up barbecues because they're causing air pollution, and they wanted to bring attention to their cause, but they accidentally blew up a Muslim barbecue. And then they're arguing, and they're like, "Well, why would you blow up a Muslim barbecue?" Like, "Look, dude, like, it's at night, it's a suburban backyard, the barbecues aren't labeled according to what religion the owner belongs to. How did we know it was going to be Muslim?" And they're like, "Now no one will pay attention to us because they're Muslim." And so it was a comedy about how if it's a Muslim, everyone just assumes terrorism, and just how strong the optics are when it comes to the Muslim community. So I made it, and I made it with my brother and his friend in our neighborhood. My parents' house used the neighbors and actors, and it was really bad, right? Like, you can see it on my website on zarqanawaz.com. It's so bad. But I thought it deserved an Oscar, and I submitted it to the Toronto International Film Festival. And then a few weeks later, I got this very irate phone call from the organizer. He's like, "Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. People submit technically perfect films, and then there's you." Right? I cannot deny that nobody has ever submitted a comedy about Muslims and terrorism before. I didn't even know it was a comedy. Like, I was just writing it. The other actors had picked up on it, and they had hammed up the film, and they had added their own dialogues. And suddenly people were laughing their heads off. And in the audience, that's a picture of my brother. the neighbors over the big giant hole in the backyard going, we're not terrorists. We don't have time. We have to pray 5 times a day. And so it became this kind of like this film that was original and quirky and got programmed at one of the top film festivals in the world, which sort of launched my career. And after that, I was able to in Canada, we have funds. You need a calling card film. And because the Toronto International Film Festival had accepted me, I was now able to cobble together, $30,000 to make my next film. And that film was called Random Check. And it was, again, a comedy about how at that time, Salman Rushdie, of death and all those things in the media. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be interesting to make a film about the media's obsession about fatwas and Muslims? But I made a comedy about how a young Muslim woman couldn't get her really badly written novel published. So she decides to take a shortcut to fame and try to get someone in the Muslim community to sentence her to death because she needs a death threat, because death threats are really hot right now. And she's upsetting the community, and they're like, what's wrong with you? Maybe we could get you psychiatric help, right? Because she's like vandalizing the mosque, and she's like, oh my God, I need to get serious about this. And then she reads in the newspaper that the Hamas are coming to town, and that's only women only. And she goes, oh my God. So she wears, niqab, and she goes with her death threat. She figures she'll get someone there to sign it. And when she gets there, she realizes it's actually a cooking class for hummus, only for men who are too humiliated to learn in front of women. And so that was my second film, and it got into the Toronto International Film Festival. And that's where I knew, this is the sweet spot for me, comedy about sort of how, the fusion of culture and media and politics come together, and what's in the zeitgeist and how I can capture it and turn it into story. Wow. And that's where I knew I belonged. And that's where I knew that my life would be happiest if I could continue.
Wow. What a story. I mean, that's amazing, mashallah. How, the whole path that you described is phenomenal. And there's so much willpower involved. There's so much soul searching. There's so much, staying focused on what you want to achieve. This is incredible. And you did all of that with a sense of humor and positivity. This is amazing. I want to also quickly highlight, you're also, on top of all your creative engagement, you're also involved with a lot of interfaith work, in your community. I'm aware of a Doctor of Divinity recognition that you received from University of Saskatchewan for all the interfaith work you have been doing. You talk about multiculturalism. You do a lot of public speaking, and you talk about pluralism and interfaith work. So, what is it like, being involved in the wider community, and why do you think is such a priority for you, on top of all the other work you do, that you involve with a lot of these initiatives in the community?
I mean, I think it's important to give back. I think it's also important to belong and to be part of. Like, I think as Muslims, we become too internalized in terms of our own victimization and our own, like, oh my God, like, look at us, everyone, there's so much discrimination against Islam and Muslims. But what we don't see is, and realize that this is part of a wider issue. And I think for Muslims, it wasn't until after 9/11 when we realized that if we wanted help from other organizations and other communities, and we have to actually show them that we care about their issues, and that we are actively trying to help other marginalized communities, and that we shouldn't be so navel gazing and staring at ourselves and not being part of our wider community. I live in Saskatchewan. Like, some of the biggest, reserves, First Nation reserves, are here where I live, and I didn't even learn about the First Nations community growing up in Ontario. Like, it was such an eye-opener coming here and learning about residential schools and the impact it had on the First Nations community, and then how little the Muslim community has engaged, with the First Nations community, and how much work we have to do, even with Black Lives Matter. Like, we as a community have to stop sort of like sending all our money to mosques, all our money overseas, all our money, internally, and realize that we have to reach out and be part of the solution for all marginalized groups, not just us, because we are a little bit obsessed with just our own issues, and we're focused on our own community. And that's not a good thing, because, we are told, like, we are supposed to be a force of good and a force of social justice in this world. But I feel like we become very, very narrow in our focus and our attitude towards the world. And I think that it behooves us to reach out and be part of helping other communities and be part of the solution, so that when things happen to us, people are like, well, they didn't do anything to participate in,
Mm,
helping
mm.
us. Like, where have they been all this time? And I think we're getting better, but I think that
Yes.
needs to be a much stronger, a much stronger movement in our community.
Very true. Absolutely. So, most people know you as a screenwriter, as a producer, as a person who has done big things on big screen. And then, a few years ago, you decided to actually publish a book. And what led you to this experience of getting to a point where you, 2014, I believe, you wrote this book, Laughing All the Way to the Mosque, where you describe your experiences growing up, of course, in Canada. So what led you to write for sort of print media rather than a big screen?
It's interesting. Like, I just had come off of Little Mosque in the Prairie. I had sold 4 pilots in the US. And when you said that you create a show, and then if it doesn't get made, they keep the rights. And then you create that. So, I was sort of creating a Muslim family sitcom over and over. And so many times you can keep changing it. And then they own the rights and it disappears. And I was like, wow, it would be good for me to write something where I get to keep the rights. And the only way you can do that is if you write a book.
Hmm.
And I thought, I had also traveled, like Little Mosque in the Prairie had been 90% shot in Toronto. And I live in Saskatchewan, and that's like a 3-hour flight. And I would live in Toronto for the week, come home on weekends. And my children were little, right? Like, my children were in grade 1, 3, 5, and 7, all 4 of them. And they were little, and they didn't see me for half of the year when I was gone in production. And so I was exhausted, and I thought it would be nice to maybe raise them, right? And be part of raising them, right? So I thought this would be great. I could stay home. I could write. I could keep the rights. I would also keep up the comedy, because I wanted to write each chapter like an episode of a television show, to keep my comedy chops alive and understanding structure and craft. And so I got a book agent, a literary agent, who sold the concept to HarperCollins. And I wrote a memoir in a way that I felt, would be lighthearted and funny, because my life had been lighthearted and funny. And, I mean, whenever you go into a story, at least in that time period, and there was a book about a Muslim woman, it's always like some really dire story. Like, she was a wife of some Taliban warlord, It was pretty sad. Like, it was really scary. Like, or she was 7 and had been forced to be married. Like, the stories about Muslim women in bookstores, I'd go to chapters and go, wow. Like there would be all these Muslim, women and it's all about torture and, someone being kidnapped by Somali pirates. And, like, I mean, what is going on? Like, it was so racialized, as in women as victims. And it was like a trope in stores. And that's all you would see. If there was a story about a Muslim woman, she's the silent wife, the oppressed wife. It was so ridiculous. I remember going there once and just seeing book after book after book. And I'm like, wow, like, that's those are the type of books that white publishers want, because it sells, because it propels a certain narrative about what the lives of Muslim women are like, which is essentially oppressed by Muslim men and tortured by religion and culture. And I was so tired of that. And I wanted, like, a book to be about vibrant and hilarious, and about what our lives are like, fun and joyful, and with positive men in our lives who are not torturing us or kidnapping us. And so that's the kind of book I wanted in a store. Like, someone would look at it and go, wow, Laughing All the Way to the Mosque is colorful, it's happy, the stories are upbeat. And it was so interesting because it got nominated for an award, and I lost. And I thought, okay, whatever, you may not have been the best book. But then judge came up to me afterwards and she goes, I was the sole judge, and I'll tell you why I didn't give it to you. Your book was too happy and too. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, where was the darkness? And I'm like, oh, I didn't really have darkness in my life. Like,
Wow.
I mean, then I was thinking to myself, my God, like when white women write memoirs like Tina Fey, no one's saying to them, oh, that's too happy and too funny. Like, where are the dark? I mean, so it's so interesting how we have been racialized only to represent, like, the sad, that sort of victimization narrative, that feeds our image, what white people believe and want to see about our lives. And I'm tired of that. It's like, enough already. There's a whole world that we have, and not all of us are being tortured in that way, because the danger of only publishing one type of novel is that it skews public opinion.
Yep.
which is constant, right? Like the oppression, the terrorism, the negativity, and we need the opposite to come. And that was my hope and goal with the book.
Amazing. I mean, and where can people find more about this book, or where they can purchase it? I'm
It's,
assuming it's Amazon.
every bookstore. It's Amazon. It's like if you go down to the local now, I guess they call it Indigo. You just
Yes.
buy it off the shelf, so it's available in every mainstream bookstore.
Awesome. It's an incredible book.
Oh.
Just a couple of questions before we end. We're coming closer to the end of our show. I wanted to ask you. I mean, given your positive energy that I hear, that I see, it's hard for me to even ask you this question. But you are being a racialized woman of color, woman of color, and you are, you are Muslim, you're Canadian, and mother of four, mashallah, and happens to be a journalist, happens to be in front of the on camera, off camera now. Well, on camera now a lot more probably, and of course off camera before. What were some challenges you faced in life that were probably your top challenges that you faced in life, and you overcame those, and here you are, alhamdulillah, sitting with us talking about your life and your journey, and sharing your experiences with us. But what were some of those, if you were to go back and think about those top 2 or 3 challenges that you overcame, and you really feel good about it, of course?
Yeah, I mean, back in those days, we didn't have people of color, like now we call it BIPOC, right? We didn't have diversity or multicultural. We just didn't have people from other communities in writing rooms. We didn't even have writing rooms in Canada. Like we didn't even have sitcoms in Canada. Like Little Mosque and Corner Gas were the first shows to come out. And so it was very new for the network. And the idea of me was very new for them. And I mean, there was this immediate sense of we've got to hire white male writers to take over the show because she doesn't know enough about the industry, about writing, about how to, become a head writer. And it was so interesting to me because today that would, I'm hoping today that would, like when I read about like, young people who make television shows now, like Girls, the creator of Girls, her name escapes me, but she was immediately paired with a mentor who helped her become head writer and learn the ropes and have the vision of the show. Whereas for me, it was very much, like she might be Muslim, and luckily for me, the show was about Islam and Muslims, so they couldn't like get rid of me. But I could get that sense was they believed very strongly that, certain producers, that we had to make sure a white man was the one who was the head writer. And I was constantly battling sort of, producers who believed that I wasn't good enough, strong enough, to head up a writing room. And that taught me a lot about how just sort of like, I mean, it's discrimination, it's racism, it's just, systemic racism, it's sexism, it's misogyny. It was a lot of things, right? I talked to one of my fellow writers on the show, and she said, yeah, there was a producer who didn't believe women were funny. And so, my husband like gave me the best advice. He's like, learn your craft, learn it so well that no one can ever question that you should be the person that, is the strongest writer in the room. And then the other thing is that you have to be the head of your own production company, because in those days, if you had rights, if you have an idea for a TV show, you have to actually sign it off 100% to another company, and they can do what they want with it, including getting rid of you, right? And so for me, it was really important to become a very strong writer, to know my craft, to never sell another idea to another production company again, to keep my rights with my own production company. And so, the next project that I'm working on, I'm not selling those rights to anyone. If a broadcaster wants to broadcast that show, they will have to get it from me. And that I have earned the right because I have already worked on a show. I have written 4 pilots. I have written a book. And that I have learned my craft, and that it has to be me that they're dealing with, not sort of a white male producer or a white, you know what I mean? Like, and that was tough in those days because there wasn't this, now we have all sorts of buzzwords about representation and, making sure BIPOC people are represented and, giving them, hiring them, and then elevating them and giving them better positions in a room. But that didn't exist in my time. And that was a really hard thing to deal with.
Well, who are some of the mentors, if you did at all, or even people who inspired you to be, where you are today? I mean, throughout your life. I mean, you starting from your childhood, perhaps up until now. If there were any people that inspired you or maybe even mentored you, and I know you said there are not a whole lot that were there to mentor necessarily in this area at least, but if there were any you were to pick.
I would say my mentors were in Muslim camp. They were like Muslim men, interestingly enough, who really believed in Muslim women as writers and were always encouraging me to write and saying, you shouldn't be going to medical school. You should be a writer. You know that, right? And I didn't believe them at that time. I remember thinking, like, what are you talking about? Like, that can't be right. And I remember a mentor in Muslim camp who would be like, no, and he would give me writing assignments and writing articles. And it was incredible. Like, this person helped me believe in myself as a writer because I never thought of myself as a writer. And he was very much against me going to medical school and he was always encouraging me to write. And I think it was that person, going to these camps and having that person there that was like, this is the career for you. You should consider that. That really helped.
That's wonderful. We really all our young friends and our kids really need those individuals who believe in your craft and your talent, and even if they don't necessarily see everything right now, they believe in you, which is amazing. If just a couple more things regarding what's coming up next. I know you are working on something big, and you have a trailer coming up this weekend. You're going to be launching something. Tell us a little bit about what's next for Zarqa.
It's so interesting. I was doing stand-up comedy. So I was, I was 8 months in. I was going to, go on tour in the interior of Saskatchewan. I had all these plans. Then the pandemic happened and it just sort of like wiped those plans right off the map. And my friend was like, my friend, very close friend, Claire Dunn, who was one of the writers on Little Mosque, said, this isn't the time to like plant, victory gardens or bake muffins. Start writing grant applications. So I did. And I got what is called an IPF trailer, which is like a competition between different teams. They're given a lump of money, and then you make a trailer for a web series. And the team that has the most social media engagement will go on with enough funding to make the first season. And so we got the money. We were picked as one of 20 teams in Canada. Our trailer comes out on Saturday.
Awesome.
And it's a comedy. I'm acting for the first time, and I'm dealing with the whole issue of race politics in romance and how men and women view each other. I was reading I was reading all these articles.
I believe in you. You can definitely be a great actor or actress here. You can see that.
There were all these articles that came out a few years ago when Master of None, The Big Sick, and it was talking about how Hollywood really likes sort of the brown man to pick the white woman as his trophy, like they are the trophy, romantic lead. That's who gets to win. And I was thinking, wow, I hadn't really consciously realized that there was this trope in Hollywood where the white person is the one that you want, is the one that's considered superior to the brown. And I was like, that's such an interesting concept. I would love to explore that. And so the idea is, that a woman's ex-husband decides to, post on his Facebook that he's got a young, skinny yoga white instructor as his new wife, and then it's his engagement photo, and he's going to invite the ex to his wedding, and then all these comments, oh, nice upgrade, and she was very impulsive and bitter and angry, and was like, okay, if you're gonna get married to a cliche, right, then I will bring my cliche, which would be a white brain surgeon. So it's a comedy about two cliches. And typically, brown people have been objectified and treated like objects in film and television. So what if brown people did the same thing to white people and started, saying, oh, I'll bring my trophy. If that's your trophy, I'll match your trophy. And so it's a comedy, and it's sort of like a self-awareness of what romantic tropes are in movies and how they treat brown men and brown women. And I wanted to play with that in another show. So that was the idea behind it.
Awesome. That's very interesting. Definitely look forward to learning more about it and watching it. And I'm assuming it's on your social media platforms, on Zarqa Nawaz, at Zarqa Nawaz.
Absolutely. Go to my website, zarqanawaz.com, all my other social media platforms, and it'll be coming out this Saturday. So I would love it if people could watch it and share it. It would be awesome.
Yes. So August 15th, folks, we want to make sure that you check it out on Saturday, August 15th. Make sure you visit zarqanawaz.com as well as Zarqa Nawaz Facebook, social media, and other social media platforms to check it out. As we conclude, if just one last question, what advice would you give to up and coming artists or aspiring artists or young people who want to be writers, want to tell their stories, want to write for big screens? What are some of the things, maybe top 3 things you would tell them to do based on your own, of course, experiences, and actually some of the things you yourself did, and you talked about?
You know what I think there's no better time than now to actually start making short films. I mean, now in my day they were just considered short films, but now I think the lingo is like a web series, right? And learn to write. Really spend time learning your craft and how to write a really good story, because there's so much competition now. So many people are making them that the YouTube is chock full, and that you could possibly lose attention to your series if it's not done and written really, really well. So learn your craft, really, really learn your craft well. Hire excellent a team, a crew. There's lots of people who are looking for a chance to become a director, a producer, a sound person. Hire a really good crew. These are people even in school and going through film school. But learn to write really well, make it, and just keep making them and getting better at them. Submitting to film festivals, networking. The only way you're going to get better is actually to do it and not to sit back and hide, because you can't keep thinking about doing it. You actually have to go out and do it. And you have to learn good people skills. You're going to have to put a lot of people together and learn to, be a person manager. But do those things and just do it. Just start putting product out and learn from your mistakes. Give it to people who know and say, how could I make this better? Can you tell me about the story? When I made Barbecue Muslims, I realized nobody understood the ending, right? The audience was silent in the end going, what just happened? And so I learned, that you've got to get feedback, do screenings, get feedback, adjust things, but learn your craft, really learn your craft and learn your writing. Because if you can learn to write, then you can create product for yourself, as a director for yourself, as an actor for yourself, as a producer. You won't be dependent on other people. And if you really feel you can't write, find writers that are really good in your community and create teams and work together.
Awesome. I love not only the piece of advice and gems that you shared with us. I love your positive energy and all the great, experiences that you have shared with us today. And I really hope all of us can learn some wonderful lessons from the life and the journey of Zarqa Nawaz, who is our featured Muslim changemaker on the show today. So thank you, Zarqa, for being here with us. And we wish you all the best in your future endeavors and creative, projects that you are launching. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you, Zarqa, and thank you to all our wonderful audience here today who are watching and will be watching on the recorded shows. Thank you for being here with us, and also thanks to Dawanet and TorontoMuslims.com for their marketing partnership with the Canada Today show and Muslim Network TV. So folks, you were watching Canada Today show, and you were watching Zarqa Nawaz tell her story. We want to hear more stories like hers. Feel free to share your story with us and message us if you have some creative ideas and stories to feature on Canada Today show. You're watching Taha Ghayur on Canada Today. Thank you for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.